Expositor's Bible Commentary on Hebrews 7, 1-28, relative to investigating Hebrews chapter 5. 1. This Melchizedek was king of Salem and priest of God Most High. He met Abraham returning from the defeat of the kings and blessed him. The writer begins his explanation of the significance of Melchizedek by referring to the incident in Genesis 14:17. His minor changes from the Septuagint do not affect the sense. First, he describes Melchizedek as king of Salem, which may mean king of Jerusalem. Salem is another name for Jerusalem in Psalm 76:2. But it is curious that if the writer thought that Jerusalem was in fact where Melchizedek ministered, he does not mention the fact that Jesus suffered there. Perhaps he was not particularly interested in geography, but it is also possible that he saw Salem as some other place. Now, Westcott, too much guesswork here, says that in Jerome's time, Salem was understood to be near Scythopolis. And again, the Septuagint of Genesis 33:18 seems to identify Shechem with Salem. Bible study manuals. If Psalm 76:2 indicates that Salem is another name for Jerusalem, why speculate about some other location? The writer of Hebrews does not have to indicate that Jesus suffered in Jerusalem either. There is no problem with his credibility because he does not mention this. It's superfluous. What he wrote suffices. He does not have to display an interest in geography, nor is it worthwhile speculating about the author thinking of another place besides Salem, Jerusalem, or that the Septuagint stipulates that Salem is Shechem. Lots of people think of things that are not relevant here. Melchizedek was not only a king, but a priest of God Most High. It was not uncommon for one person to combine the roles of priest and king in antiquity. It is, however, the special characteristics of this man rather than the dual offices that are noteworthy. In Genesis 14:17-8, we read that the king of Sodom, who had suffered at the hands of the kings Abraham had just routed, went out to meet the triumphant patriarch, and that Melchizedek brought out bread and wine. But the author passes over both of these facts. He concentrates on those aspects of the incident that will help him make the points he has in mind about the work of Christ. These are short books. We don't need the whole history of it. The first of them is that he blessed them, a point he will return to in verse 7. Verse 7:2. And Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. First, his name means king of righteousness. Then also king of Salem means king of peace. Point 2, verse 2. Abraham gave Melchizedek a tenth of everything, i.e. the spoils from the battle. This is another point that is elaborated later. So far, the author is simply identifying Melchizedek with his reference to the incident after the battle. Now he goes on to the significance of Melchizedek's name and title. The name, he says, means king of righteousness. This is a translation of the Hebrew name. It might be more accurate to render it, my king is righteous. But the NIV gives the sense and brings in the noun righteousness that features so largely in the New Testament vocabulary of salvation. Then the writer goes on to the title King of Salem. The place name comes from the same name and same root as Salam, the Hebrew word for shalom, for peace. And it may accordingly be translated in this way. The Greek word peace has about it the negative idea of the absence of war in the New Testament. However, it picks up something of the fuller meaning of the Hebrew shalom, which is regularly translates in the Septuagint. So, Irene, I think, comes to signify the presence of positive blessing, the result of Christ's work for men. We are reminded of the Prince of Peace. Isaiah 9:6, righteousness in verse 7 is among the qualities linked with the Messianic figure. The combination of righteousness and peace is seen in Psalm 85:10. As used here, the two terms point to distinctive aspects of Christ's saving work. Hebrews 7:3, without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, like the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. So the terms without father and without mother are used in Greek for waifs of unknown parentage, for illegitimate children, for people who came from unimportant families, and sometimes for deities who were supposed to take their origin from one sex only. Well, I don't think we got to go that far. Just look for the plain meaning. Some scholars hold that Melchizedek is viewed in the last mentioned way and is being pictured as an angelic being. Wow. But it seems much more likely that the author is proceeding along the lines that the silences of Scripture are just as much due to inspiration as are its statements. When nothing is recorded of the parentage of this man, it is not necessarily to be assumed that he had no parents. It says without mother or father, but simply that the absence of the record is significant. Now, does Abraham exist? Where's the record of him? Come on. Absurdities. This cannot be taken that there is no record of Melchizedek in the sense of no paper trail or no obelisk trail. No record, as some contend. It is too specific and repetitive. Melchizedek is described as without father or mother. It doesn't say without record of father or mother, without genealogy. It doesn't say without record of genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life. It doesn't say without beginning or days of life because you don't have any record if he has no beginning of days or end of life. Like the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. He cannot be a mortal being because he, like the Son of God, remains a priest forever. So there is no end. Furthermore, in multiple places, Melchizedek is stipulated as having the qualities of the Son of God, meaning God. If there were no record of Melchizedek, yet he's nevertheless mortal, why the emphatic repetitive phrases without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, like the Son of God who remains a priest forever? It goes over and over and over again, establishing the fact that he has no father or mother, he has no genealogy, he has no beginning of days, he has no end of life. He's eternal, like the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. How can he remain a priest forever if his priesthood is temporal because he's human and will end his temporal life soon, or did? Why not simply write that there is no official record of him? We have no record of him. We don't know where he came from. Okay, that sounds better. No, it says without. How do you know he has got no father or mother? On the other hand, forever translates in these Greek words, which occurs only in Hebrews in the New Testament 4 times. It does not necessarily indicate duration without any end, but rather duration which lasts through the circumstances indicated in that particular case. Well, how do you know? There's no information. When you don't have information, it says be quiet. Here, however, no limit is expressed or implied with the expression, thus indicates that Melchizedek's priesthood goes right on without cessation. Melchizedek, I say, being the signatory representation of priests in the priestly order of priests in his priesthood, must be eternal, forever, because it says he represents priests that are eternal, i.e. God, because that is the essence of Christ, who is of the order of the priesthood of Melchizedek, who can be nothing less, eternal God. Both are eternal God, one and the same. How about pre-incarnated appearance to Abraham? What was true of Melchizedek simply as a matter of record was true of Christ in a fuller and more literal sense. Bible study manuals. There is no fuller or more literal sense indicated. What is clearly indicated is that Christ's quality essence is compatible, the same as that of Melchizedek, eternal, God. So the silence of the Scripture points to an important theological truth. Melchizedek is also without genealogy, a term the writer apparently coins. Taken together, the 3 terms are striking, for in antiquity a priest's genealogy was considered all important. But he says he doesn't have one, or we couldn't find one or didn't have a record of one. After the exile, certain priests whose genealogy could not be established were excluded from the priesthood as unclean. So why don't you exclude Melchizedek? See, they're so contradictory. And just as the record says nothing of Melchizedek's genealogy, so it says nothing of his birth or death. This further silence in Scripture points to the writer to another truth about Jesus, that his priesthood, Jesus' priesthood, is without end. He uses the full title of Jesus, Son of God, as in these verses, my Son in 1:5 and 5:5. Since the writer does not use it often, we may sense an emphasis on the high dignity of the Son of God, and it is the Son of God who is the standard, not the ancient priest king. The writer, but wait a minute, the ancient priest king is the standard for Jesus, and Jesus is the standard for the priest king. Otherwise, Jesus couldn't be of the order of Melchizedek's priesthood. Wow. The writer says that Melchizedek is made like the Son of God. Well, if you're made like the Son of God, then you are God. You can't be made approximately like. Note that the Son of God is like Melchizedek. Thus, it is not that Melchizedek sets the pattern of Jesus follows, and Jesus follows it. Rather, the record of Melchizedek is so arranged that it brings out certain truths that apply far more fully to Jesus than they do to Melchizedek. Wait a minute. If Melchizedek is a priest on the order of his priesthood, then why does it apply less fully? Wow, geez. With the latter, these truths are simply a matter of record. But with Jesus, they are not only historically true, but they also have significant spiritual dimensions. The writer is, of course, speaking of the Son's eternal nature, not of his appearance in the incarnation. Not of his appearance in the incarnation. Of his appearance in the incarnation, I don't understand why it wouldn't be. It's both. The writer is, of course, speaking of the Son's eternal nature and his incarnation, which is eternal. Wow. How can you just, this is like some kindergarten coloring with colors, with crayons, just scratches all over the place. It's disorienting. Bible study manuals. Melchizedek cannot be made like the Son of God in the sense of less than the Son of God, because one cannot be made like yet be less than the Son of God, yet qualified to have the characteristic of being eternal in order to qualify for Melchizedek to be a priest of a priesthood that God might appoint Christ to be a high priest of. Nonsense. So one must conclude that Melchizedek was made like the Son of God in the sense of actually being as the Son of God is, i.e., he was the Son of God in every way, eternal and God. You can't be like being eternal, you are eternal. Hebrews 7:4. Now observe how great this man was, to whom Abraham, the patriarch, gave a tenth of the choicest spoils. So the author proceeds to bring out the greatness of Melchizedek with an argument the modern mind may find rather curious, but which would have been compelling to his contemporaries. See, this guy's talking nonsense again. Then how's the Bible going to be figured out now? No. How about then? First century. Oh, the Bible came out, but we don't understand anything until the 20th. What? The Bible is meant for everybody. In the ancient world, it was generally recognized that there was an obligation to pay tithes to important religious functionaries. This implies a certain subjection on the part of those paving to those to whom the tithe was paid. To those paying, not paving, not paving a street, those to whom the tithe was paid. So it was significant that Abraham paid to Melchizedek a tenth of the plunder. This last word means literally the top of the heap, and was used of the choicest spoils of war. From these spoils, an offering would be made to the gods as a thanksgiving for victory. Well, this wasn't to the gods, right? To the God, Son of God, Melchizedek. Well, they're subjective here. Abraham gave a tenth of the very best to Melchizedek. Was he a god, or was he the gods? Why throw that in? The Bible indicates that Melchizedek was God, the Son of God, pre-incarnate, and that's the best possible conclusion under the circumstances of of context. In the Greek text,